The midterm elections are happening in just 9 months, and Donald Trump is already calling to nationalize elections, to essentially illegitimately take control of states' election systems down to like how the votes are counted. And he and his allies are now straight up telling us they plan to try everything they can to interfere in the midterms, including using ICE agents. Steve Bannon, who had a close relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, wears 3 shirts and likes to speak as if he's still in the White House, has been leading the charge.
We're going to have ICE surround the polls come November. We're not going to sit here and allow you to steal the country again. And you can whine and cry and throw your toys out of the pram all you want, but we will never again allow an election to be stolen. But let's put you on notice again. ICE is going to be around the polls in the 2026 midterm elections.
Sherrilyn Ifill is the founding director of the 14th Amendment Center for Law and Democracy at Howard University. She's a former president, director, counsel for the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, and she joins me now. Sherrilyn, I want to just sort of acknowledge that Steve Bannon says a lot of things that are meant to kind of like bloviate and intimidate. But it's also the case that one of the more disturbing developments, I think, particularly in the last few months, is this notion that ICE and CBP and DHS are kind of a specifically kind of weaponized political arm of federal law enforcement in a way that would make them more amenable to the kinds of interventions Bannon is talking about. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that some people have pushed back on me, and first of all, thanks for having me, Chris, have pushed back on me for suggesting that what we're seeing with ICE is indicative of our larger problem with impunity and law enforcement in this country. But I think when you hear Bannon, but even Trump, you understand that they view them all as the same. And so they think every federal agency that has officers is all part of the same and all part of the president's, kind of commanding force that he can send out at will. You'll recall that when the journalist Georgia Fort was arrested last week, it was a DEA agent outside her home, and that agent was masked. They told us that ICE had to be masked, but now DEA agents are masked. So they're kind of all melding into one strike force that the president seems to think is under his exclusive command.
And an example of that, this really disturbing detail from the New York Times reporting about that Fulton County FBI search of the Board of Elections there, that Tulsi Gabbard's down there for reasons, again, that remain unclear. And she essentially gets the FBI agents carrying out the search together and calls the president on the phone for him to, like, give him attaboys over the speakerphone, which is just incredibly unusual and also feels like, again, to your point about trying to create a kind of personalized strike force to deploy at will for whatever you want. This is in furtherance of that objective.
Oh, absolutely. I was on your show, Chris, in January of 2025 when we talked about the pardons of all of the January 6 folks. And I said then that I thought the president wanted to create a kind of cadre of brown shirts. He's always wanted to have an enforcement strike force. You'll remember in his first term when suddenly there were all these federal officers standing outside the Lincoln Memorial, masked, I might remind you, and we had no idea what federal agencies that they were taken from. This is how Trump thinks. And it's very serious. Obviously, there's a long history of voter intimidation in our country, particularly in the South, and the use of sheriffs and police departments to intimidate black voters in some places in the South. And so we're not unfamiliar with this particular tactic, but we have watched ICE. We see how they behave. We see how lawlessly they engage with American citizens. And the idea is to intimidate. And so I think Bannon saying that is actually more to make people not come than his certainty that ICE will be around all the polling places, because I don't think they're going to be able to pull that off. But I definitely think they will be out that day. I think there are many people, just because they have tangled with ICE, and particularly Latino American citizens, who might feel actually very intimidated about coming out on Election Day. And that's what we have to really fight back against.
Yeah, that's such an important point, because the intimidation in some ways is the point, right? That intimidating is the means by which you can attempt to suppress voting activity, political activity. And one thing I found really unnerving about the way DHS has comported itself is they seem to be sort of innovating, if I could use that word, or trying new things in terms of intimidation. This reporting from the Washington Post about using this sort of secretive legal weapon against critics, right? So in October, a retiree emailed a DHS attorney to urge mercy for an asylum seeker, like a totally normal thing that is obviously protected under our Constitution. Then DHS subpoenaed his Google account and sent investigators to his home. Homeland Security come after him with what's known as an administrative subpoena, a powerful legal tool that, unlike the ones people are most familiar with, federal agencies can issue without an order from a judge or grand jury. What do you make of that?
Oh, I make a lot of it because many of these ICE agents have now been saying that I have a warrant, and then when citizens who are informed tell them it needs to be a judicial warrant signed by a judge, they say, we don't need that anymore. They believe that they have the ability to expand the law within an agency of the government. Like, this is not from a court, this is not from the Supreme Court. And so these administrative warrants, which can be signed from anybody from kind of mid-level management up to the top of the agency, in this case ICE or DHS, has never been seen by a judge. Why do we want it to be seen by a judge? Because a judge is independent. Before an agency has issued a warrant to be able to come into your home, you want an independent judicial officer to have reviewed it and to have signed it. And they have just decided themselves. Now, there are a number of cases that are going to work their way up through the system. But this idea that this man, this retiree, who sent an email saying, you know, please don't deport this person, it sounds like he's a good person and we should use common sense. Not only do they contact Google to get his records of what he's been Googling, but also agents show up at his house to ask him questions. I mean, he says they said they wanted to hear my side of the story. What side is there except I'm an American citizen, and I commented, as the First Amendment allows me to do, on a matter that I care about. So this is also for intimidation purposes. And I think we have to be honest about the fact that anyone would be intimidated by that kind of action. That's why we have to push back hard with legal cases, with suing, and with trying to hold on to the constitutional order that we can. We may not have it all, but we've got to hold what we can, because this is how intimidation works. It makes people shrink away and not try to protest, not try to speak out, not try to vote. And that simply is not something we can do if we intend to be a democracy in this country and to hold back the worst of what I think this administration has planned.
Yeah, and God bless the folks that talk to the press about it, including the bookstore owners who had ICE, showing up asking for their employment records, the sheriff in Maine who just had that too, and this individual as well, Sherrilyn Ifill. Thank you so much.